Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about the Voigtlander or Voigtlander 35mm f1.4 Nokton Classic version 2, a lens that I have a very complicated relationship with. So let's get into it. As much as I'm trying to learn a little bit of German, trying to switch back and forth between the English and German pronunciations completely screws up my English, so I'll just say Voigtlander here. Manufactured by Cassina in Japan under the Voigtlander name, this lens is about 55mm wide at its widest, 29mm long, extending by about 3mm on close focusing, and it weighs just 190 grams. It's a very compact lens, especially considering its fast maximum aperture of f1.4, and it feels reasonably dense in spite of that size considering the all glass and metal build. The lens employs black anodized aluminium for the barrel and the focusing and aperture rings, brass helicoids visible from the rear of the lens, and some other chrome parts like the chrome nose. This is a prime lens, so it doesn't zoom in. It has a fixed focal length of 35mm. That is a nice moderate wide-angle field of view, giving a good amount of context around a subject while still putting a gentle bit of emphasis on them, at least at moderate distances. Or if you choose to get close to your subject, you can get a real feeling of intimacy with that bit of perspective distortion, making you feel like you are right there with them, without going quite as far as something like a 24, which starts to make things look a bit weird and make faces, look a bit unflattering, let's say. As this is a rangefinder lens in the VM lineup, the minimum focusing distance is just 70 centimeters, meaning that you're talking about a magnification of 0.05x and a max reproduction ratio of about 1:19. So this lens, it's about as far from a macro lens as a macro lens is from a pear. The front of the lens has a metal 43mm filter thread set inside that chrome front ring, and the front element shimmers because this is the multi-coated MC variant of the lens. Both version 1 and version 2 of this lens design are available in either single-coated or multi-coated flavors, like a lot of CV lenses, to suit your taste when it comes to flare and contrast. The chrome nose also has an outer bayonet for the LH6 lens hood, which is quite big and not actually included with the lens. The aperture range starts at a very fast f1.4 and closes down to f16 in half-stop increments. The iris itself is made from 10 straight aperture blades that could give you 10 pointed sun stars, but I very rarely see them in practice. The text on the focusing ring, like much of the lens actually, is engraved and filled in with paint, with markings in both metric and imperial, and with a depth of field scale to make zone focusing nice and easy. There isn't an index for focusing when using infrared sensitive film, which is quite unfortunate and a bit of a bummer for me, but it is quite common within the M-mount sphere and certainly within rangefinders in general, for some reason. The focusing ring turns very smoothly and with a nice level of resistance, turning about 100 degrees when going between the minimum focusing distance and infinity without an infinity lock. It does turn a bit more heavily than my friend Kieran's 35mm Summicron lens, but I kind of honestly prefer that because it's heavier in the sense that it's not difficult to turn, but it makes it a bit more secure, like you're not going to accidentally bump it, say if you're zone or scale focusing. And speaking of bumps, this lens has a metal focus tab on the underside rather than a scalloped or knurled focusing ring, which is arguably more useful on such a small stubby lens anyway. The rear of the lens has the Voigtlander VM mount, their name for the Leica M mount, so it's compatible with any M mount camera from Leica, Voigtlander, Pixie, Zeiss, or even Epson, as well as any mirrorless camera that you choose to adapt to, because M to whatever adapters are very widely available and very cheap. The lens is of course rangefinder coupled from infinity down to the minimum focusing distance, and like I said, when you focus you can actually see the brass helicoids inside the barrel from the mount side. Finally, the optical design consists of 8 elements in 6 groups, and it's a highly symmetrical double Gauss derivative that is a bit more modern than the classical 6-element 4-group kind of design, and the lens does incorporate one abnormal partial dispersion element near the rear of the lens. This is also part of the classic lineup rather than the vintage lineup like my 50mm Voigtlander f1.5. As vaguely similar as these two lenses are, they behave completely differently, and this is a point of confusion that I want to address here. They're both Nokton lenses, meaning fast maximum aperture. One's a 35, one's a 50, sure. Both are multi-coated, that's the flavor that I've chosen for each. But this is a classic lens, meaning that it has a classical optical rendering, which is a very polite way to say it's not very good at wider apertures. It's designed to have a lot of spherical aberration and other aberrations that you see in some of these pictures in a way that just renders really beautifully. In many ways, it's quite similar to the pre-spherical Leica 35 Summilux steel rim. I don't think this is a steel rim clone, which there are plenty of nowadays, but it behaves very similarly, and many people kind of lump it into that same general category. The vintage lenses, on the other hand, have a vintage style outer housing. You know, this has a sort of film era looking body, I guess, as much as you can say that about a lens. But the optics behave in a much more modern way. It's a much sharper, more well-behaved lens. It's not clinical by any means, but if, you know, sharpness is your goal, a vintage lens will do better than a classic lens in the Voigtlander lineup, even if that's a terrible naming scheme. The lens is very small, and considering the build quality, it's very lightweight as well. It's not quite a pancake lens, it does protrude from the camera body quite a bit, but realistically, it's jacket pocketable with just about any M-mount body. If you want something smaller than this while still staying in a similar sphere of lenses, you could look at the 35mm f2.5 color scope bar, also from Casino Voigtlander. But this lens is pretty damn small for a 35mm f1.4 regardless of anything else, and I don't see it as a burden to carry around unlike some of my other lenses. I should also say that viewfinder blockage is an absolute non-issue with this lens, whether you're at infinity or the minimum focusing distance. At least without a hood, the lens doesn't block your viewfinder whatsoever. In a broad sense, it's the most affordable fast 35mm lens within the M-mount sphere. Yes, you might be able to get a deal on something, or you might choose to adapt an LTM lens, but this is the budget speedy 35. 35mm 1.4 is a great versatile lens to have if you only have one lens, and this particular lens, for many thousands of people, has become their entry, like the lens they either get and then pick up a camera to use it, or they pick up a camera, don't really know what they want, and they end up picking this lens, and the vast majority of them end up happy. It doesn't break the bank at like 350 to 450 euros used, depending on condition and which version you're talking about. So it's generally quite affordable, and especially if you are interested in something like the pre-spherical steel rim Summilux, and you don't want to spend the money that that lens costs, or to pay for the reissue that came out in the last couple of years. This lens is an easy way to get a similar kind of look, again, despite not being explicitly a clone of that lens, for a tiny fraction of the price. When you stop it down, this lens is very, very sharp. If you've ever seen one of these color charts on my channel and any of my videos, I shot those photos with this lens. I use it for all of my technical testing because even from f4, it is sharp across the frame, it is consistent, it is reliable. That is something I value a tremendous amount, and it behaves really well. And f4 is not that far stopped down. f8, it's basically perfect, as any lens should be. Similarly, the very fast max aperture of f1.4 is fantastic to have and makes it a very versatile everyday carry lens because it can kind of do everything. There are a lot of situations you'll find yourself in where f1.4 at like a 15th of a second might be manageable, but f2.8 at a quarter of a second isn't going to work for you. So you have the option to, you know, shoot this lens wide open when you need it, and then you can stop it down when you need the performance. I keep mentioning that this is the second version of this lens design, and one of the biggest weaknesses of the V1 is significant focus shift, particularly at f2.8 to f4. To the degree that you would be comparing it to like the cheaper, like the Mr. Ding 50mm f1.1 kind of lenses, like that degree of focus shift. And that's a deal breaker for me. You know, using a rangefinder is something I really enjoy, and where I, focus with the rangefinder, that's what I want to be in focus. Focus shift is something I generally strongly dislike, and that was the deciding factor for me in getting the version 2, and I was lucky I got a good deal. But that does come at a cost in some other ways, as we'll talk about shortly. Having a focus tab on the bottom of the lens makes focusing a breeze and a really enjoyable experience. It's also great for zone focusing, so I can go say like, there, that's about, 1.4 meters. It's a bit under 1.5. There you go, 5 feet. It's really easy to dial these things in once you start to become familiar with the lens. It also means that this lens helped, this is very personal, this lens helped me realize that my problem with digital photography isn't digital as a medium. I love digital photography. It's focus by wire. I hate focus by wire so much. And using this lens, or my other M-mount lenses, on my mirrorless bodies with a real tactile focusing ring has been really enjoyable and makes me want to go and use those cameras more, which says a lot considering how much I shoot on film. The build quality, of course, is fantastic, with all metal and glass construction and generally very tight assembly. Casino Voigtlander have had some hiccups over the last few years, including with this lens model, where some copies develop like a bit of a wobble with the lens barrel, usually only after your warranty has expired. So that may give you a bit of pause, but by no means is Voigtlander a knockoff brand. It is a very high quality, reputable third-party brand with a stellar reputation overall. I think like when you look at problems like this, you see so many people go like, oh, forget Voigtlander, forget these cheap knockoff lenses, Leica or die. Those are the kind of people who blow up tiny little microscopic nothings into a giant issue. They're not to be taken quite as seriously as you might expect. Not to say what they say is invalid, but the volume with which they say it is a bit misleading. Call me basic, but I love a chrome nose on my lenses. I think they look absolutely gorgeous, especially on a silver body. That silver and black alternating pattern, it's almost like a panda kind of design. It works so well. I know a lot of people, it isn't to their taste, but you can buy rings that go on the front of the lens that just put a black ring over the chrome nose. So you can hide it if you don't like it, if that's a real deal breaker for you. But oh, it works so well in my opinion. Bearing in mind a caveat that in the most dictionary sense of the word, it is literally the point of this lens design, it sucks wide open. It is soft, there is tons of vignetting, the corners are smeary, there's spherical aberration out the wazoo, chromatic aberration, everything you can imagine. It's just atrocious, and there's chroma to boot. But it's beautiful. This is one of these annoying things about this lens. It is a gorgeous lens in its rendering. It is absolutely stunning. Lots of pictures you can take with this thing look so good. That steel rim pre-spherical look is famous for a reason. But by any metric you can put on a graph, at least wide open, this lens is atrociously bad. But I love it. If you really do hate the look wide open, you can shoot it at like whatever the half stop is between 1.4 and 2, like 1.7 or f2, and it clears up a tremendous amount. And admittedly, I do tend to do that. But in a strict, as objective sense as I can give, given how I make my videos, yeah, it's a really bad lens wide open. The out of focus highlights are very nervous or busy with this lens, and they have like these strong highlighting rings around the bokeh balls, which make it unappealing in certain situations, and making this its own point because the version 2 is significantly worse than the version 1 in that regard. That's one of the things that was compromised on to eliminate the focus shift from the version 1. If you do care about this a lot, the version 1 might be, a better option, but it isn't exactly a flawless performer in that regard either, though it is noticeably better than the version 2. There are two other main ways in which the version 2 is worse than the original copy of this lens. The first being barrel distortion. Both of these lens designs do demonstrate quite a bit of barrel distortion, quite a surprising amount actually for a 35. We're not talking about 15mm full frame lenses. But the version 2 is noticeably worse, and it's the only film lens, again apart from like ultra wides, that I've ever personally used where I can see the barrel distortion in my images. Sometimes, it depends on the kind of subject you shoot. For a landscape, you're not going to notice. When you're doing street or urban photography, it might be quite a bit more noticeable, and it's something you can only fix in scanning, not when printing. The other thing is, I haven't personally tested this because I don't own the version 1 to compare to, but apparently version 2 has significantly worse corners when it comes to sharpness and overall image quality. How significant, I can't really say. I've seen some comparisons where they are quite starkly different, others where it's not so clear, and I don't know whether that's down to the technique or some copy variation. I can't say, but it is worth knowing that the version 2 has a reputation and is known for having less sharp corners. Although I'm completely happy with it. I'm shooting some very slow, very fine-grained films like Pan F or Kodak 2254 and the like, and I'm very happy with the results overall. But say if you were shooting on an M11 or an M10R or something like that, you might benefit from the version 1 if you can tolerate the focus shift. But then the focus shift is more visible. You have to play this kind of game and balance your priorities. I get that it's a common thing to not include a lens hood in the box nowadays, but not including the LH6 with this lens is kind of crummy. The lens isn't exactly inexpensive if you buy it new, and to not include the hood, yeah, that kind of rubs me up the wrong way. And it's not even that nice of a hood. It looks kind of ugly. I'm not a big fan of these rounded vented hoods. I'd rather have like a squared hood with a vented corner, personally. but at least there are tons of options out there for lens hoods for this and other similar types of lens to fit your preference in terms of style and material, so you don't have to go with the LH6 if you don't like the look. Still kind of should have been included in the box. And of course, being a rangefinder lens, the minimum focusing distance of 70 centimeters does suck for close focusing. You could have up to a 75mm lens with the same minimum focusing distance as this lens. That would get you significantly tighter, more intimate shots for like details and things. Obviously the field of view is different, but the point is 70 centimeters is not close for a 35mm lens. And if you want to do close-up photography, lens isn't going to do it for you. But then you probably also shouldn't be looking at an M-mount system anyway. So those are my thoughts on this 35mm f1.4 Nokton lens from Voigtlander. I really don't have a firm conclusion on this lens because I have very mixed feelings, if that wasn't clear already. When I shoot really close, especially with black and white film, like those pictures of India I shot recently, it's absolutely gorgeous. The rendering is beautiful, the background is so nice. It's not technically a high-performant lens in that kind of scenario, but it looks so, so good. But then there are times when I want to shoot wide open, far away, either for, depth of field reasons or just because it's dark, where this lens really doesn't hold up, and I want to shoot something like the 50 instead, because that is actually sharp, despite me not really liking 50mm as a focal length as much. So for my kind of photography, it doesn't always work, and then I'm tempted to buy the 35mm f1.5 Nokton, but then I'd have to sell this lens because I can't justify having two of the same lens and near enough the same lens in the same mount. But then that lens is a bit bigger, and then I might miss the look that this lens gives. Either way, it's an extraordinarily effective budget option within the M-mount system. It's a 35mm f1.4 for, let's say, roughly €400. That is a stellar value proposition, and if you want a steel rim pre-spherical kind of look, it's going to give you that in spades when you shoot it wide open, and when you stop it down, it's going to behave well, like a normal lens. In many ways, I treat this lens as an f2 lens that I can just crack open to f1.4 when I really need that little extra bit of speed boost, at the cost of some image quality. And I think that's quite a healthy way to look at this lens if you're not specifically seeking out the look that this lens brings to the table. I can definitely see a situation in which someone buys this lens because they see it's a cheap, fast 35, and then they're disappointed by the image quality. So that's why I think of this like f2 with a turbo mode kind of feeling about the lens. It kind of works well for me and a couple of other people. I really don't know with this lens. I mean, my heart is telling me to keep it, my brain is telling me to go to the 1.5, but I could go back and forth on that for many more months as I have done already. So I'll just leave it there. This lens is beautiful. It's not going to be for everyone. I can see people being not misled, but misinformed into buying it and not really liking it. But when it hits so, so well. I love this lens, and I don't like that it's not the perfect lens for me. But I'll shut up. So that's all I'll say for this video. Stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.